Today, Henry is the chairman of the City View company. They do investments in housing and so on. He keeps on giving back to the community, just like tonight. He had a fee and said, here, Richard, this is for the Alviso Santa program. Take this. This is for kids, education. We're all nonprofit, just like CTC. I can go on and on. And again, I don't take it lightly. It's an honor for me to introduce the former Secretary of the HUD, the former Mayor of San Antonio, Texas, a very successful businessman. Let's give a Raza Roundtable welcome to Mr. Henry.CISNEROS.
Richard, thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words of introduction. Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. I've known Richard for going on 25 years. And thank you most importantly for your community service. Richard is one who's never forgotten the Alviso community. Every time I talk to him, it's not just about current affairs or ongoing business, but it's about the community, some event that he and his family is supporting or something that he's raising money to give back to the community. I suppose that comes from his legacy of public service, including 33 years as a member of the San Jose Fire Department, culminating as a district chief. Let's hear it for Richard and his community service. Let me tell you how special this setting is tonight. I have been all over America. As HUD Secretary, I visited 200 different American cities in every single one of the 50 states. I have been to Latino communities all over America, and I have never seen a gathering like this where people come together once a month just to share information and gain information and share networking the way the Raza Roundtable does here in San Jose. Felicidades. This is really something very special. Then, to go through the introductions as you did and actually abide by the chairman's rule that you can only list one association, that's pretty special as well. But I also want to say what's very special is to have a moment of spirituality, of blessing, the way that Reverend Alvarez blessed this room, and I am very grateful for the blessing that you gave me personally. What a special moment that is. And then to have a warhorse who pull this together for all of these years, like Victor, and has the respect of the community just to hold a group like this together, that people would actually come on a Friday night for a purpose, like this, networking in community. All of that makes this a very special grouping. So congratulations to all of you for being part of something like this. As I was listening to the reports and listening to your backgrounds, I mean, we have here the president of a university, we have the chief of police, we have people from the hospital district, we have the city manager's office talking about board appointments, an assemblyman and other public officials, a range of Hispanic business chamber and small business people. We have youth groups here. This is very impressive. So as I say, I congratulate you. And then when you add a venue like this, where Rose Amador is the hostess in this CTC assembly facility, gracias. Let's hear it for her for making this. I appreciate and respect the spirit of the gathering. And so what I'd like to do is just share a few thoughts with you along the lines of kind of up-to-date information. In the same spirit that you shared information, I'll share information that I'm hearing from across the country. And I'll try to keep that part of my remarks brief so that, it's now 6:19, so that we can take questions and make the bulk of the conversation a dialogue. And Victor, if you'll allow me to proceed in that way, what I'll do is bring you a kind of an update on several important points related to Latino progress in the United States, and then we'll go to a series of questions, if that works for you. Let me begin by touching on what is the most timely and important subject before our community today, and that is the subject of immigration reform. Many Latinos and perhaps many Americans don't think that it's an important subject because it deals with a limited number of people among the 310 million Americans and among the 50 million plus Latinos. But anytime that people are suffering the degree of human suffering that they are with our outdated and ineffective immigration laws, where we have 12 million of our fellow human beings living in the shadows with the threat of deportation, doing the work that this society needs, abiding by the laws and functioning in our society, but treated like second-class citizens, that's wrong, and it has to be changed. We need to have immigration reform, and we need to do it this year. Now, as you know, there are, most of the frameworks for thinking about immigration reform have focused on sort of three central themes. One of them is border security and the enforcement issues. A second one is legalization strategies, how to legalize groupings of people or a large group of people, to create some structure of legalization in which people can be here as workers and be legal within the system, have papers, be able to travel, be able to own, be able to buy, be able to invest, etc., in a legal way. And then thirdly is a path to citizenship. Because we've never in our country had a group of people who were here and allowed to work and be here on a permanent basis, but denied a pathway to citizenship. We've never had a defined apartheid in the country that says we are going to have a group of people who are second-class citizens. So those three elements are what most people have agreed now for decades, and certainly for the last decade, are the fundamentals of immigration reform. The United States Senate last summer passed an immigration reform bill that included elements of all three. The border enforcement provisions were very strict. They actually put additional money into things like walls and electronics and e-verify enforcement at the point of business, etc. A lot of extra money, but they did pass border security issues. And they had legalization provisions that dealt not only with critical groups like the Dreamers, young people who are here, who came when they were little, had no say in the decision to come here, have never known another society or another country, so it would be exceedingly disruptive to deport them and send them back to a place in which they have no base, and who, by the way, have great talent and ability to contribute to the American future. So there's the Dreamers. Here in Silicon Valley, very importantly, the technology industry wants H-1B visas for technology workers, and all across California and the country, we need workers in the agricultural sector. Another part of legalization that the Senate addressed was the 12 million who are here undocumented. And it set out a series of hurdles, if you will, that deal with things like learning English, paying back taxes, paying a fine for having been here in contravention of the law, but it created a legal system for people to live here in dignity and have a place. And the Senate, against all odds, courageously included a path to citizenship. A very complex and rigorous path to citizenship that takes 13 years to complete. 10 years in a probationary status, 3 years actually applying for U.S. citizenship and going through the hurdles, but at least a doorway, a way to see how you get to citizenship, which keeps hope alive. So the Senate passed that, and it was a great positive step for our country. But unfortunately, the House of Representatives, under a very, very difficult leadership and very difficult committee chairs and very difficult Tea Party faction, has concluded that they will not pass a comprehensive bill. They will not support a comprehensive bill. They will not pass the Senate measure. What they will take up is individual piece-by-piece legislation, as they say. And they're going to begin with, they say, a set of border security measures that are even more rigorous than what the Senate set out. They're being very, very tough about it. And in fact, they say they want to make anything else they do contingent upon verification that the enforcement measures are working. So it becomes a kind of a catch-22 where you could hold out forever and say it's never good enough, it's never good enough, it's never good enough before you move to the next step. So that clearly is not an acceptable way to proceed, but they want the face saving in their districts, if you will, of saying that they've been tough on enforcement. On legalization, there's some ideas out there that they might be willing to undertake things like dreamers, agricultural workers, technology workers, but they're very, very unsure about what they would do with respect to legalization of the large mass of the 12 million undocumented. They keep referring to it as amnesty when there's nothing amnesty about it. Not when you have to pay taxes, not when you have to pay fines, not when you have to go back to the back of the line, not when you have to take tests, etc. There's no amnesty about it, but they keep referring to it, even the legalization process, as amnesty. And then, unfortunately, in all of the House versions, there is no reference to path to citizenship at all. So the question is, do they create an impediment to citizenship, actually an obstacle to citizenship, or do they just end up being silent on the subject? Well, as I say, the Senate passed its measure last June. The House has done nothing. There was some thought that they might be able to do something this spring. In fact, the Speaker, Speaker Boehner, who says he wants to do immigration reform and wants to pass these individual pieces, right, unfortunately has committed himself to something that's called the Hastert Rule, which was passed by a former speaker, Speaker Dennis Hastert, which says nothing can come out of can be voted on by the full House until it has majority support of the Republican caucus. So imagine that. You have an entire House that's evenly split, but the entire House doesn't get to vote on something unless there's a majority within the Republican caucus, where the Tea Party is the strongest. So it's a formula for gridlock. It's a formula for not getting anything out and ever voting. I talked to Speaker Nancy Pelosi today, and she said if they brought those measures to the full House, there would be a majority now for these kinds of measures. But they're never going to get to the House in this form. So the thought has been that perhaps, oh, and by the way, the Speaker, to show good faith, brought very capable staff aboard to work on these provisions, and 2 weeks ago offered a set of principles at a House retreat for the Republican caucus in Maryland, with the idea that he would be able to create a consensus around these principles and they would be the building blocks going forward. Instead, he got such pushback that he's essentially dropped it, and what had been a very hopeful moment, the whole nation sort of watching that Thursday when the caucus met in the hopes that within a few days there would be a sense that this could be converted to legislation. Instead, within a few days, what we got was the Speaker saying, it's dead. It's dead for the year. Don't think anything can happen. Nevertheless, there's been some hope that after the Republican primaries this spring, this is the season, as you know, for the primaries, where people have to run in their own party, and most Republicans have feared that if they were positioned as pro-immigration, they would end up with an opponent to their right who would hurt them in their primaries. So they have said, let's wait until we see who files. And then let's wait until we see how the primaries come out. So there's some thought that when most of the primaries end, like in May, that in June or July, there might be a window in which people are brave enough to do what needs to be done and vote immigration reform. When I say what needs to be done, the Farm Bureau came out with a statement last week, the National Farm Bureau, the American Farm Bureau, which said we're going to have trouble picking the crops in the field. The implications are prices for food are going to rise because we don't have enough people to pick the crops. And we have other industries like technology that are saying, give us some relief. We have people here who are in our best universities who are working with us as interns, who are learning our business, who we want to keep, but because their immigration status is uncertain, they leave and go to other countries and work for our competitors against us with the education we provide them. It doesn't make any sense. So this needs to be done, but we're now looking at this window of June, July at best. And then others say, well, that's not going to happen because they're worried about the November elections. So we have to wait until after the elections in November in what's called a lame duck session, which is after the elections before the next session of Congress. And as I spoke to Leader Pelosi today, she said, well, that just doesn't happen because even if they were to pass something, it has to go to conference and there's not enough time. So the long and short is we are facing a meltdown, a tragedy, a catastrophe in which people are suffering. We have people today, students, who are going to college every day, who are undocumented, who if they make a simple mistake, a human mistake in life, like have a taillight out of their car and they stopped in some communities, will be deported. We have women who are going to work in the day, in the morning, not knowing whether they will be able to be home to fix dinner for their children because they may be apprehended during the day, and this is actually happening across America. When their children come home from school, mama's not there, but she's been picked up during the course of the day. We have workers who have spent their whole life working here, 25 years, built a family, paid taxes, backbone of their churches, and they're getting deported. We have massive deportation underway. So something has to be done. And the administration, on the other hand, is observing the law as they read it, and it says they have to keep the deportations occurring. They have to keep enforcing the law. So we're seeing massive levels of deportation, higher than we've ever seen before. It's a very, very bad situation. So my plea to you, my appeal to you tonight, is to think about things that you can do, identify members of Congress, particularly members of the Republican caucus, who may be on the fence, who may be unsure, and say to them, we're now beyond the point where this is a political matter. This is very serious for human beings. It's serious for our economy. It's serious for our businesses. It's serious for our workforce. It's serious for our families. It's serious for the human beings who are suffering. Ya basta. Enough. We've got to do something about this, and you must take the lead in getting some kind of a measure out. It's not going to be perfect, and we're going to have, let me say, some horrendous choices to make. We may face a choice as Latinos, as supporters of immigrants of all races and ethnic groups. By the way, there's about 12 million undocumented, and 10 million of those are of Hispanic heritage. There's another 2 million people who are Asian and Eastern European and others, Caribbean, African, others. We may face a moment in which we have to choose whether we want to accept some form of legalization, and only a long, distant pathway or way to get to citizenship, right? That there's no direct correlated pathway. We may face that reality. When I talk to the immigrants, they say, just help us get legal for starters, and we'll take the other piece up as we go. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying the moment may come where very, very tough choices have to be made. But let's get in position where we can have those choices to make. So my first point to you tonight, and my plea is, as a roundtable, as leaders, university, healthcare, police, and by the way, the police have been very, very helpful in this process across the country. There's a group called Badges, Bibles, and Business, which is one of the most influential with the Republicans. Badges, meaning law enforcement, who says, don't make us be the enforcers of the immigration laws. We can't do that. And help us by bringing people out of the shadows, because right now people are afraid to report crimes and help the police because they're afraid of their own status. So badges, Bibles, evangelical Christians who are coming to a reading of the Bible that says we can't afford to put people in this position biblically, you know, as Christians. And thirdly, business, which is the chambers of commerce and the business organizations. So this is we're in a different place right now. We're at the point where this is something we cannot tolerate. And I encourage you to rise up and figure out a way to be influential on this question. Point number one. Point number two, and I will be briefer in my remarks, deals with issues of income and wealth. I've had the privilege recently of working with a number of Latino leaders and economists that are working on the question of Latino economic recovery after the recession. We got hit very hard. Our families lost a lot of wealth. By some estimates, about 50% of our net worth evaporated in people who lost the value of their homes, who lost their houses entirely, who lost their jobs, who lost their small businesses. We got hurt arguably harder than any other community in the United States. We already know that Latinos make less in income than average Americans. About 78% of what average American households make in income. So our income is less. That's bad. But the real tragedy is when you take another metric, not income, but wealth, net worth, assets, what we have saved and what we own. That percentage is 10% of the American average. Now, why is that? Well, in part, it's because our wages have been less, and therefore our people have less to save and less to invest. There's less money left over at the end of the month to buy stocks or to buy bonds or to put money into savings or to save up for college or to create insurance annuities or any of the other things that constitute wealth. Our home ownership rate is substantially less. The national home ownership rate right now is about 65%. The Latino home ownership rate is about 45%, 20% less than the average, and this is one of the principal mechanisms for amassing wealth in the United States. The equity you own in your home is ownership. If you don't own a home, you don't own the principal thing that most Americans own, which is a home. So we have less to save, we have less to invest, we have less that we own in terms of homes. Our businesses tend to be smaller, therefore worth less, or fewer of us have business, or because many of us are immigrants, and it takes immigrants a generation before they have saved anything, generally. Better part of 20 years, right? That's the average, kind of what the estimates show. And then it's the next generation that benefits, and we tend to be younger. So you put all of those factors together and do the analysis, and what it means is we end up owning, we end up having 10% of the assets of the average American family. This is hugely important because what a family has in savings or net worth can be leveraged when it comes time to do a college loan, when it comes time to buy a small business, when it comes time to invest in something that generates income. So this is a flaw, if you will. This is a glitch in the American system of creating the middle class. And this has implications not just for our community, but for the entire nation. Because Latinos are, as you know, the largest minority group in America today at over 50 million people, almost 55 million people. Largest minority, fastest growing minority, youngest population in the country. We are the basis of one of those backbones that defines American prosperity, which is the middle class. But the question is, will we be a middle class? Or will we be marginalized for the long haul? And that's a critical question, not just before our community, but before the entire country. The American way of life since the end of World War II depends in large measure on having a strong middle class. We have a strong middle. We're not like poor countries that have a small number of people at the top and a huge base at the bottom of exceedingly marginalized and poor people. We have a middle class. Will Latinos be the next middle class? That's the question. Since the end of World War II, the Demos Foundation in New York, Demos Institute, tells us 3 sets of policies have created the American middle class since the end of the Second World War. Number 1, access to college, access to higher education. We must maintain affordable ways to get people to college. Mr. President, critically important, state institutions like yours, it's the backbone of creating the middle class for our country, access to college. Secondly, income and wage policies. From the minimum wage as being debated in the country today, to strategies like supporting unions so that unions can protect workers' working conditions and grievances and argue for wages, critical strategies. And thirdly, and by the way, unions are under attack in our country as almost never before, including public unions on issues of pensions and so forth. And then thirdly is home ownership, for reasons that I cited earlier. It is enforced savings to pay a mortgage, and it adds up. Every month, their interest goes down, and the equity goes up, and at some point in time, freeze the clock, the equity is your wealth. So we've got to take the right lessons from the recession. The lessons from the recession are not to back off on issues like home ownership. The lessons are to put the pedal to the metal on education strategies at all levels, from pre-K through elementary school, through accession to college, graduate school. We need to, that is a critical issue for our community, and we need to focus on issues like the one the President is discussing today, which is the minimum wage. So today the debate in the country is about income inequality. That's very important, but let us not forget the other piece of that equation is not just income, what comes in and goes out every month, income, but wealth, earnings, assets, savings, ownership, critical to our community if we're going to be the building block we want to be for the future. Finally, let me say, in terms of these themes that I just want to put on the table, and then I'll be happy to answer questions on these or anything else you wish, is to just say a quick word about our politics. I have the privilege of getting around the country and seeing the progress we're making, and I think, it's very substantial. We have 5,000 or so elected officials now across the United States. Most of them are in local office. School boards, I heard several school board members tonight. City council members, I saw candidates here. County supervisors, assembly level officials, and others at the local level. We're also fortunate to increasingly have high-ranking people in the United States Senate as governors, members of the Congress, and they become the seedbed for people who will serve in the cabinet, for example, and hopefully one of these days run for president. My hometown of San Antonio has a very bright young talent in Julian Castro, who I think has great potential for the future. And San Jose has produced important Latino leadership, like my friend Ron Gonzalez, who was the mayor here. And you will have others in due course from the present crop of city council members and supervisors and others going forward. So we have to be attentive to our politics. We have to encourage people to run for office. We have to support them financially. We have to register to vote and then participate in voting in order to elect people. And then once we have people elected, we have to hold them accountable to remember the community that elected them. They're not there to be superstars. They're not there to track their own track, but they're there to give back to the community. That's the way it's always been in America. As the population grows, even though people are poor, like the Irish, they elect a person like Honey Fitzpatrick to be the mayor of Boston. The mayor of Boston. And then, 2 generations later, his grandson, John F. Kennedy, becomes the president of the United States. But a lot of Irish have been helped along the way in terms of public services, in terms of business opportunities, and that's the way the American system of progress works. We're a very numerous population, we're large, but they're not going to change the rules for us just because we're large. The rules are going to work just the way they have before, and that means we have to focus on things like our incomes and our assets and our education and our wages, and yes, politics is part of that equation. So I commend you for gathering on a night like this. There's wonderful spirit in this room. As I say, I see it very sincerely. I have been all across this country, and I have never seen people gather together to think about what's good for the Latino community. When I was Secretary of HUD, I had a chief of staff. His name was Bruce Katz, who came out of a politically active community in the Jewish community. And by the way, the Jewish community has a great lessons for us. One of them is that people are frequently judged on what they give back to the community. How do they give back to the community? And I could tell you story after story of people whose social standing, whose prestige in the community is based on, did you give back? Did you help others come along? Did you just raise yourself, or did you hold out a hand and bring others along? Very important ethic. It's called tzedakah in the Jewish tradition. But this chief of staff of mine, Bruce Katz, in my office, said that anytime something was on the news, it could have been the most the most obtruse issue in the news, his mother would say, yes, but what does it mean for the Jews? You know, we have to ask that question, yes, but what does it mean for our people on so many fronts? And for you to take off an evening like this and gather here just to look at the progress of San Jose and the progress of Silicon Valley and the progress of California and the progress of our country through the lens of what does it mean for our people, I commend you for that, and I'm grateful to you for asking me to be with you this evening. Gracias. Please sit down and we'll take some questions. And if you want to moderate the questions, Victor, you can do that. And if not, I'll be happy to take them.
Well, you can do it, Mayor.
Okay.
You have experience.
All right.
We're going to have a few questions, okay? Because it's
I'm good on time.
about 6:45, so we have about 15 minutes, okay?
Great. All right. Yes, sir. I'll try to be as brief as I can in my answers.
And I will too. You know, my question is about labor. Labor's not here. Why not? Okay. I don't see Neil. I don't see anybody else from labor. You talked about labor participating, being part of this area, and they're not here. Why not?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask.
Exactly. I know. And
I'm
I
not from
appreciate
here,
that.
so I can't speak to who's here or who's not here. I know that there's some people well versed in the tradition of labor who are here, particularly on the public employee side.
Correct.
Like Richard Santos, for
Correct.
example.
And that's not what I'm talking about. Labor,
Right.
Josue Garcia got up and walked.
In wages, living conditions, and assets, labor is an important ally and partner in the process, because it's very hard for people to fend for themselves unless there's a group that's helping them along. So when you get to talking about working conditions, when you get to talking about grievance procedures, when you're talking about wages, it's really helpful to have the group. And one of the things that has really, powered our country along for the last 50 years has been, to have people speak up for the working person and the collective of the workers, So we're in a modern era, and there's all kinds of critiques about the role of labor and so forth, but I would argue it's one of the elements, one of the pieces of how we're going to make the kind of progress that needs to be made. So
As a union iron worker,
bring them in.
As a union iron worker, I want to thank you.
Yeah. Next question. Yes, sir.
I have a question for you. Like I told you before, my father, he was deported from Texas back in 1950.
Right.
To Mexico. So what happened 84 years ago is still happening today. And thank you for talking about immigration reform. But my father, as a young guy, used to travel all the United States. And one day I asked him, what was the most racist state in the United States? He always pointed to Texas, the place he was born.
I can't argue with some of that.
What can you tell me the difference between Texas and California?
It's a good question. First of all, I love my home state. I'm from San Antonio. I was mayor of the city. They blessed me with the opportunity to be their mayor for 8 years. But we're going through a very, very tough time right now. And some of the Tea Party elements have sort of taken over the political dialogue. And Texas today is a very, very hostile place. Every single statewide office is held by Republicans. And it seems that they have to run as hard to the right as they possibly can. There is a tragic election underway right now. 4 men running for lieutenant governor as Republicans on the Republican primary. I've watched their advertisements, and it doesn't even seem like you could live in the United States of America, how hostile these ads are. Every single one of them starts with, I pledge to shut the border, illegal aliens, people from third world bringing third world diseases like leprosy, actually in television advertisements. It's bad. It's really, really bad. Now, the good news is that one of those 4 guys is going to get nominated by the Republicans, and they're going to face a very capable Latina named Leticia Vanderpue, who's the Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor in Texas. And she will fight those arguments, and it's going to be a very interesting race. Whether she can win or not, that's a tough thing, because Texas is today a red state, but at least the argument is going to be made, and the fight is going to be engaged, and that's going to be something to watch in the country. So the answer to your question, the difference, Texas has not yet, 2 experiences. One, has not yet come to terms with that line of attack the way Californians, and particularly Mexicanos in California, did after the Pete Wilson strategy of demonizing Latinos. And we saw the result of that, which is that Latinos said, you're not going to do that to us, we're going to punish you for that strategy. That hasn't happened yet in Texas. And the other is, I think California has done a better job of coming to terms with diversity of its population, not just Latinos, but diversity among Asian groups and multiple Asian groups and other populations, and finding a way to live together in a more diverse way. We're getting there. San Antonio is there, but the whole of Texas is not yet there. Yeah. We'll try to spread this around and take as many as we can. And this lady over here. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dolores Marquez with the Board. And my question to you is, earlier you mentioned the minimum wage.
Yes.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on minimum wage, because you're looking at it at a national level. So if you could speak to that.
Well, there are arguments. I'm for the minimum wage, because when you hear the arguments for and against, the arguments for make more sense to me and touch the things that I see and observe more. The argument for is there's certain irreducible minimum that people need to live on. And for example, right now, in most major metropolitan areas in America, from the field that I know, which is housing, a family earning the minimum wage as it exists today cannot afford the fair market rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in any city in the United States of America. So people live in overcrowded and indecent conditions because they're not making enough money, right? And you could go on to calculate how much they have to spend on medicines, how much they have to spend on transportation, therefore how little is left for children's needs, clothing, etc. It's just not enough money. So that's the argument for. Some would make the argument against and say, if you raise the minimum wage too much, then businesses can't afford it, so they will cut back on the workforce, and the result will be fewer workers. So you will raise the wages for those that are working, but you're going to end up with a higher unemployment rate because more people will be out of work, right? But generally speaking, if you raise it in increments, that hasn't happened in our society over the years historically. So when you weigh the arguments for and against, I come out in favor of for, and I'm hopeful that the Congress will pass an increase in the minimum wage this year. And I would say even many Republicans are coming around to the idea that they can't watch the escalation of incomes for the highest 1% grow to incredible amounts and then freeze the numbers for people. It's not right. It's not fair. So I think we're going to see that pass. Reverend, you had a question. We'll take the Reverend. The Reverend always gets to make sure his question is addressed.
My question has to do with the need for your support for to get the National Park proposal to create a national park for Cesar Chavez and the farmer. And recently they came out with the National Park Service with the support of the Secretary of Interior, Salazar, and the new Secretary.
Right.
And we know we have to build a momentum to get funding for that Park Service. And so I think we talked about it this way.
Yes, sir. We talked about it this afternoon. You gave me the materials. I'm more than happy to support it, and I will be happy to work with the administration, including the Secretary of Interior, to try to get the official designation of park space at the critical places where Cesar Chavez's legacy was created, including at La Paz, where he's buried, and at the other places that were critical in his story. Started here.
The Raza Roundtable and the Chavez Vision family came together to push for. The Park Service never recognized that the farm worker movement started here.
Yeah.
And we flipped that around.
Good.
We've now made history. And you're welcome to these reports that document.
Well, it's very important.
That the farm worker movement started in East San Jose.
Right.
At our mission chapel there, okay?
With Filipino workers, as I recall, no?
No, with Cesar and Richard and the family.
I know, but I mean, he was representing Filipino workers very early on.
Yes, that was from that area there. So this is another battle that we're taking on.
Good. It's very important to use memorials and symbols and monuments and media to remember the story as it really was, to remember the legacy. And certainly it's true in the case of Cesar Chavez. By the way, let me just say to the Chavez family and to others of you, last Saturday night I had the opportunity in San Antonio at the Cine Festival Guadalupe to see a documentary that was shown at Sundance called Cesar's Last Fast, which is the story of the 1988 fast that lasted 39 days, in which Cesar drank only water for 39 days. And at the end of it, his doctors were incredibly worried because he was very, 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 very near organ failure. But they used that fast and the suffering that he imposed upon himself to get the attention of the growers who were pouring pesticides. That was what that fast was about. Pesticides on the workforce in the fields. And then they used that as the framework to cover the entire range from the beginning of his organizing through his eventual death in 1993. So I would commend that movie to you if you can find it. And maybe it's a project for the Raza Roundtable to show at a setting like this. It's a 90-minute film that will move you to tears, I promise you. It's a beautiful piece of work. Yes, sir.
My name is Frank Espinosa. I'm a faculty member with the Evergreen Valley College, which is one of two colleges that are Hispanic serving institutions, which means...
One of two in this region?
One of two in our district.
Okay.
25% and above Latino student population, meeting other criteria.
Right.
And sad to report, there are not any universities in our area who have HSI designation. The one that is, their status is very tentative, as you know,
Yep.
National Hispanic University. Rumors are running about, but we'll see what plays out with that. But my question has to do with students in higher education, and you talk about that being a key path to our community really being able to get into the middle class.
Right.
Fact of the matter is, you know tuition is skyrocketing. Now for the first time, student debt has surpassed credit card debt in the United States. And so it's the dream that our students have is getting further and further reachable, attainable. And so what would you recommend our community do to address this very serious challenge that our young people who are in this room are facing right now, and a lot of us as parents are wondering, how in the heck are we going to pay for our kids
That's
to go to
a good
school?
question.
Because for-profit institutions are waiting in the wings to target our vulnerable Latino community to try to get them to sign on the dotted line, go into debt, and I worry about our young people and the next generation as a result.
For-profit institutions meaning banks and
for-profit higher education.
higher education.
So what recommendations would you?
Well, you know, you asked me what should this community do, and I think the answer is it would be important to have a working group from within the community, perhaps grouped around the roundtable, to really look at what is the state of play today in the Congress, in the national lending programs. I know the administration, several Democratic administrations, including President Clinton, where I served, really tried to advance the ball in terms of affordability of college. And this administration has made some important efforts as well. But you're right, it continues to get out of hand in terms of the tuition levels and the burden that's placed on the students. And then the costs of the loans themselves with interest and so forth. I've read several analyses recently that just to show you how things work in life and in economics, this is not just about the costs of going to school, but it's a cost you're saddled with into life. So the actual ability to afford things in life is impacted. What job you have to take instead of what career you'd like to pursue is dictated by your student loans. Whether or not you're going to be able to, for example, invest in a small business or invest in a home before you're 30 is going to be impacted by what your school loan debt is. So it has massive implications. To answer your question, I would say put together a work group of concerned people, and then based on your findings of what you think are the best approaches, you know, some concrete data of what the local circumstance is, talk to responsive Congress people like Congressman Zoe Lofgren, who's a very, very respected member of Congress and a member of the leaders' inner circle, who's very good on this issue, and try to get, you know, further improvements on the national scene.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir, back there, and then we'll come over here.
Thank you very much for being here, sir. And my name is Sam Ho. I'm Director of Community Relations and EO at San Jose Evergreen Community College District, working for Chancellor Rita Cepeda. And as you can see, the evidence of the diversity that we have in this room today is the result of years of leadership by people like Mr. Victor Garza. Yeah. And we're very proud of that because it brings us together, and I don't think, like you say, anywhere in the nation that has such a thing.
Yeah.
I came from Southern California, I can testify to that. So the question for me is that we have like 70% of our county population is made up of minorities. But when you look at the boardroom, you look at the executive level, the decision-making tables, you don't see representation of people from different ethnic groups. How is it that we can bring those voices from minorities together that share the common challenges that you share with us through income or education, employment and contract? How do we get together to create a voice that can get to the table and make those decisions for the community that we do represent?
You know, it's a very, very interesting but a complex set of questions. First, let me say, you are blessed to live in an area that is not poor, but it is one of the most dynamic economies, not just in the United States, but in the world. Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, Northern California is a marvel for the world. Not only what has occurred here in transforming San Jose from a community of orange groves to the Silicon Valley, to the technology, telecommunications, electronics center of the world, but what is yet to come. The lead that Silicon Valley has amassed in the biosciences, for example, venture capital investments and biosciences innovations in stem cell work that's going on at UC San Francisco, in medical devices, in nanotechnology, all of those things that are going to transform the human experience through the biosciences is going to come out of here, just like electronics did. The Milken Institute in Los Angeles did a study and said this: the biosciences will be to the 21st century what electronics and telecommunications were to the 20th century. Imagine that. We can't even fathom a world without cell phones, without avionics, without cars with computers, all the stuff that we benefited from in the last century. When these breakthroughs occur in the biosciences, it's going to be unbelievable in its impact, and fortunes are going to be made, businesses are going to be created, careers are going to be created, Nobel Prizes are going to be won right in here. So the question is, how do we prepare minorities, Latinos, Asians, African Americans, and others, to be part of that process? Clearly, it begins with education at the highest levels. I mean, at the most intense levels, from pre-K, as in San Antonio, where we just passed a tax increase on ourselves to put in place pre-K education for children in the city. A city taxed itself to say we're going to support pre-K universally for the children of our community. That's just a start. Then quality of public schools and charters and magnet schools, and then accession to college. You have here in San Jose State a school which it's not going to be Stanford in terms of its research dollars, but it is one heck of a platform for people to come out of minority neighborhoods and learn the skills that they have to participate in the world that Stanford helps create. I mean, why not? It's a public institution who should play the role that the land-grant public institutions played in the last century, right? But for the new economy, for the new industries. So education is clearly one of those strategies. Small business contracting is one of those strategies. Getting our young people into the coming industries of the future, the sunrise industries that are the future. All of these things are part of a long march. They're part of the long strategy for how we create a society that is truly more inclusive, truly more participatory, in which some of the barriers of income and wealth break down using the engines. But let me go back to my very first sentence, and is answering your question. You are blessed to live in a community where these resources exist, and then the question becomes, how do we harness them? How do we tap them? There are Americans who live in places in Pennsylvania, or in East Chicago, Indiana, or in Youngstown, Ohio, or in the Mississippi Delta, or in Appalachia, or other places, Midwestern rural communities, who do not have this blessing. Every day for them is a story of contraction and decline. You live in a place where it's a question of how do we figure this out, and how do we get our children to participate in it? That's a very, very, very different set of questions, and much more promising. Felicidades on that opportunity.
One more question and that's it.
And you'll get to choose, so I don't...
No, you.
I saw this gentleman over here earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir.
We appreciate your eloquent commentary about immigration reform. My name is Dennis King with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and we are certainly passionately committed to the economic empowerment of the Latino community. But I do have a quick correction, if I may, of your commentary, and then a question that's really on our minds quite a bit as it deals with this issue.
Okay.
First, you had observed that never before in our history have so many people been ignored or unallowed to be able to pursue citizenship. May I suggest that there was a precedent? It was called slavery. And for many of us, we view that those that are not allowed to become citizens or are enslaved today to a system that's not responding to them. most Latinos have given up on the Tea Party Republicans and view them as neo-fascists in so many ways. But what breaks so many hearts is to realize that so many Latinos were the very biggest supporters of the election and the re-election of our president. What does it take to get them to review those laws with the humanity that they should be required to stop the deportations today until immigration laws get fixed?
Well, you asked a very good question. You asked a good question. And I can understand how there might be concern and support about that in the room. Here's the issue, and I want you to think this through with me in a nuanced way. First of all, the Congress will not act on the laws that need to be fixed, on the laws that need to be changed. Will not. Let me set that aside and come back to it. But the reality is, the Congress must act to change the law. Now, the President of the United States, therefore, is faced with the existing law, right? And the law says, these are the processes of citizenship, these are the processes of violation, these are the processes of deportation. I think that when he asked Janet Napolitano to enforce the law as Secretary of Homeland Security, she was the governor of Arizona, she became his Secretary of Homeland Security, she went about enforcing the law as she saw it, and it has led to this level of deportations. Right? Now, the President said, I don't like the deportations, but I have to follow the law, because if I don't follow the law, I have no chance of persuading the Republicans to change the laws. I have no chance, because they'll say that I am not enforcing the law, which is what they're saying about him, right? So that's the issue on deportations. There are things he can do using his executive authority. And 2 summers ago, he took one of those steps. He granted deferred action to 1.2 million students who would have their deportation status deferred for 2 years so that they could continue in school and not be in fear of deportation. I have a young man living in my home who is an engineering student at the University of Texas at San Antonio who was in danger. We didn't let him drive to school because if he was stopped for a traffic violation, we might never see him again. So my wife went to great trouble to get him a lawyer, and we got him the deferred action, and now he's 4 A's and a B in engineering at the University of Texas. And that's because the president gave that 2-year deferral, right? So the president did that. And the Republicans didn't like it, but they didn't hammer him with it because the humanitarian case was so strong for those young people. Are there other people he could do that with? There's some questions in the law. The Attorney General has said probably not. There's no, you would be in violation of the law if you did other people using those criteria, if you deferred other people using those criteria. So here's the calculation the president has to make. I want to pass immigration reform because I want to address 12 million people, and I want to address the dreamers, and I want to address agriculture, and I want to address technology workers, right? And if I cross the line in terms of doing things under my own power that the law is questionable, not only will they sue me, and it will go to the Supreme Court, and I might be overturned, but it kills the chances of getting any action in the Congress. That's the dilemma. That's the dilemma. So, you know, I think, now let's return to my original point. The Congress hasn't passed the laws. The Republicans are blocking it. It's very simple. Right now, what we've got to do is get the Congress to pass the laws, and particularly get the Republicans who are being recalcitrant to offer the measures that are being held up in their committees. That's what has to happen to make this happen. Now, if they absolutely refuse to, then I think the president will be looking for extraordinary things. Things that he would not ordinarily do in the process, somewhere down the line. but this is not the moment, because we still have a chance to do the right thing and pass immigration reform that will touch 12 million lives instantly. So that's the case that I would make to you. Thank you very much for allowing me to come over and meet with you tonight. Thank you.